representative candidate.
Rich Tate, Mercer Island.
Steve Kasner, East Bellevue Community Council.
Rowan Hines, Issaquah. Brent Hunt, Bellevue.
Dave Elliott, Bellevue.
Todd Woodley, Hal Woodley Properties. I'm on the board of the ETA and also the vice chair of the Transportation Commission.
Bruce Nurse, retired. Jim Horn, Mercer Island.
Jim Hill, Cover Development Company. Ernie Seams,
John Conde, Newport West.
Kim Jackson Jacobs.
Mark Burfine, Enrix. John Niles, author. The book is out June 15th.
Janet Nelson, Women of Washington.
David Halbowitz from Bothell and Stop 405 Tolls.
Mike Nickram, I'm a homemaker, making homes in Seattle, and I'm former author, co-author of the 1995 City of Kirkland Comprehensive Plan, which I have here, including its transportation promises from 1995.
And Will?
Will Knebling, Kirkland.
All right.
an editor, city editor, a metro editor, a politics editor, a bunch of other stuff. I've never been to transportation. So it's been a lot of fun to meet
Richard Wagner,
area and
Seattle Times Traffic Lab.
Find out, I think as our president said about healthcare, who knew that transportation was so complicated? I really didn't know. So a little bit of background. So we started Traffic Lab in September, a year ago in September. I think our first story was one by Mike Lindblom. It was about the performance of the I-405 tolls. We kind of kicked it off with that, and it was an interesting story. Got a lot of notice and a lot of comments and that sort of thing. We average about 30 pieces of content every month, which is about one a day. Pretty good, you know. One thing we became obvious early on is that people love to read about transportation. Well, first off, they love to complain about transportation. Then they love to read about it, and they want to talk about their community. They want to know, why is this thing? Why do we do things this way? Why do we do things this other way? You know, all very good questions that are worthy of exploration. These stories do really well online. It's, you know, back in the day, I've been doing this for long enough where, you know, I remember when fax machines came to the news. So it's you know, I go way back. And now that, you know, we're primarily a digital company, we can actually figure out what people are interested in. I mean, I remember back in the day, you would write a story, you were working for a newspaper that had 200,000 circulation, you read a story, put it out there, and well, my God, 200,000 people saw my story, they read it. Well, as it turns out now, we know that's not really true. You know, some small fraction of that 200,000 actually read it. Well, now we can figure that out, so we can actually see how many page views the story gets. The Traffic Lab stories do very well. It's one of the best read topics that we have. It's one of the top performers measured by page views online. You know, crime and politics beat it as categories, but not many other things actually get more page views and more notice than transportation stories. Our main mission is to kind of sort through all the stuff going on with transportation, and as I've come to find out, there's a lot, and try to find out what the facts are, try to have an unbiased recitation of what the facts are, what is the truth of the stuff, try to provide some context so people understand how decisions are being made, and look more deeply at some projects and that sort of thing. And there's a lot of, another thing I've learned, there's not a lot of like transportation related blogs out there. You know, Urban does a lot of transportation stuff. Transit blog, Seattle Subway. There's a whole bunch of these things. Many of them come from a certain point of view, and I think they're all good. They all have really good material, and they cover their area very deeply. But they do have a certain point of view, and we try not to do that. We try to play things down the middle and to actually just stick with the facts as best we can. So the Traffic Lab is one of 3 of these what we call labs that the Seattle Times has now. The first one was Education Lab, which started about 5 years ago, and that has been very successful, and it continues on. Then, like I said, we started a year ago in February, and then a few months ago, 5 or 6 months ago, we started Project Homeless, which also was another lab. These are, we call them labs, and they're set up a little bit differently because of the funding source. For 100 years, pretty much every newspaper in the country made us money through subscriptions and advertising. And as you may have noticed, that model doesn't work very well anymore. Print subscriptions are crashing still. Advertising has been going down. We are making a little bit more online, but it's not enough to offset the loss of print. So we have added basically a third funding source, which is money from sponsors and from foundations, and mainly foundations and sponsors, which can be individual companies. Like Traffic Labs primarily sponsored by some generous individual companies that are interested in the topic and want to see some good public service journalism done about that. So that's how we're funding these projects, and it really does kind of help keep the numbers of reporters in our newsroom up. So lights on, bills paid. I don't know of any other, for-profit, for-profit newspaper in the country that is actually funding in this way. This is a typical funding source for nonprofit media companies and nonprofit media organizations. A lot of these national investigative reporting groups like ProPublica and those sort of things get foundation money and all that, but not able to write stories that are important to the community, temporarily within the community. I will make a quick disclaimer about the funding source, and we're very clear about this to funders, and we put it on all the stories that we do, that we operate, as a newsroom, we operate independently from all of our funders, and we maintain editorial control over all the content. So although people give us money, they don't get to tell us what to write. Happy to hear suggestions, and many of them provide suggestions, that's great, but it's ultimately our decision, our editorial decision of what we're going to put out. Like the other two labs, Traffic Lab has a staff of 4 people. There's 2 reporters. Yes?
Is there any kind of regular interface with your funders, even though you maintain your journalistic independence?
Yes, and yeah, believe it or no, we have each of these organizations, each of our labs has quarterly meetings with the funders that I go to, and I present like what we've been doing for that quarter. And
is it like at the Rainier Club? Or
no, it's at the newspaper office.
Oh, okay. Just checking.
And we also issue reports, quarterly written reports about what has occurred. So we do try to, as best we can, without pestering the funders, keep them informed of what we're doing. So we have Mike Limblin, which I think many of you probably know. He's been our transportation reporter for, I don't know, 15 years. I've really relied on him to help educate me about this topic. I'll hear something and I'll go to Mike and say, Mike, is this a big deal or what? I mean, should we be doing it? And he's been really helpful in kind of schooling me on what seems to be important. I have my own ideas. He has his own ideas, but it's been really great to have him there. David Gutman is the other reporter. I hired him a couple of years ago, I guess. Actually, I hired him originally as a politics reporter. He's a young guy out of from Vermont, but he was in West Virginia working for the Gazette in Charleston, West Virginia. Really good, good writer, and can really get up to speed on things quickly. So he's been a great addition to the Traffic Lab. And then we also have an engagement editor, Michelle Bruckman, who was a recent college graduate, and her mission is to do a lot of reader engagement. Try to, she runs our Twitter feed. We're on Twitter, at ST Traffic Lab. You can follow us on Twitter. She does a regular weekly column that we do that have readers write in, ask us questions about things that are going on, and we try to answer those as best we can. So that's what her role is. Then of course there's me, and I supervise spokes, try to set priorities, think about what we should do, work with photo and graphics, like you might expect any editor to do. And then, like I say, edit the stories before we publish them. In addition to Traffic Lab, I also supervise state politics and government. I do the legislature. So if you have a question about the legislature, I may or may not be able to answer it. And then I also I do some national politics, and I also supervise the science report, which I happen to be a science fan. The major areas of coverage that we're involved in, and kind of categorize these things, is the first one, which I feel is the most important as far as this topic is concerned, is what I call watchdog and accountability journalism. This is looking at the agencies and projects and seeing how are they performing, are they doing what they said they were going to do, how are they spending money, looking as deeply as we can about and holding decision makers accountable. That's a really big part of our mission that we try to do. We've, in the last little over a year, we've broken some stories about Seattle streetcar cost overruns. We looked at Sound Transit spending priorities. We fact-checked the performance of 4 or 5 toll lanes, and that's been, like I say, a really important part of what Traffic Lab is all about. Another big part is what we call solutions journalism. I should back up and say Education Lab started out of a collaboration with an organization called the Solutions Journalism Network, and it was a group of people, a national group, whose aim is to orient journalism from just pointing out problems, which we're really good at, saying, hey, you've got a problem there, you should fix it, and then walking away from it, and not offering any way of solving it, to looking at saying, hey, there's a problem. You know what? There's somebody over here who has a possible solution. Maybe this would work over here, and try to think about stories in that way. And so we're, trying to think about what are some of the solutions that could exist out there to our transportation woes, to congestion or whatever that we have. We're still a little bit of work in progress on some of the solution stuff. Our mission is to go and try to find solutions in other parts of the country as best we can. I'll be honest, it's a little bit of a struggle when you're comparing transportation systems from like what we have versus Denver versus somebody else. There's all these different factors that go into why a solution there might not work here. Geography, governance, all kinds of things. So those are all things we're kind of working through. But in the last several months, we've reported on the region's trip reduction program, which is quite successful, actually. We wrote about King County's van pool service, which is the biggest in the country, and it works for thousands of people. We've looked at congestion price tolling, which was kind of fortuitous. We wrote about it, and then later the mayor proposed we should do congestion price tolling for for downtown Seattle. So we'll be doing more about that. We look at telecommuting. We did a quick trip up to Vancouver and wrote about their light rail and bus system and how it's integrated and how they've used their land use regulations, which admittedly are very different from ours, but to drive usage of their light rail system, which is very busy, way busier than ours. Of course, it's been around a lot longer, more built out. That makes a lot of sense. Another area of coverage we have is breaking news. That's something we're responsible for. When it comes to mind immediately is the Amtrak train crash. A little bit totally Traffic Labby. Yeah, maybe not. Some of it is, but we were involved in writing about that. Any kind of big funding announcements or big project announcements, we do those. As I kind of mentioned, we do consumer information, which is a lot of like traffic alerts, warning people about lane closures, anything that might be and also looking at ideas that might help them their commutes better, looking at new technology, whether those are transportation apps or whatever that might help people get around this region a little better. Graphics and interactives is a big focus of ours. There's I'm sure you guys know there's huge amounts of data out there dealing with transportation, and although I find a lot of it very confusing and kind of hard to sort through, but we're trying to get some of that data and be able to present it in an interesting and understandable way, whether it's, you know, like the numbers of trips or trips by mode of transportation or cost or whatever. Though that's something we're trying to do more of. One interesting side note, this is an idea that I had that I'm sure David got one, probably regrets that I had it, but I asked him to figure out how much is spent, how much was spent on transportation, both in operating the transportation system and then building it out last year in King County. It seemed like a basic question to me. Well, we've been at it for about 5 or 6 months and we're still trying to figure it out. It's just every agency reports things differently, and trying to get them to, you know, say, no, I need it this way, I need a calendar year, not a fiscal year, I need to know all the debt service and all this stuff. It's been interesting. We're really close to getting it, where I think we're going to be able to have an interesting graphic that will show the amount brought in through how much taxes is coming in to paid by people in King County, and how much is being spent on the transportation system. Because the number's a bit of a whopper.
Will you do that by jurisdiction and by mode?
I think we will have it.
County road?
Yeah, we're trying to do it by major agencies, you know, Sound Transit, WashDOT, SDOT, and then some Belleville. Yeah, there's a little bit of that, and then some of it's light rail, bus, road, that sort of thing. We're still trying to sort out how we're gonna divide it up so it makes sense. So we'll see. And then, as I mentioned, the other area that we do is reader engagement, which is in our big reader engagement tool, which is this column that Michelle does now, and it's and I got to say it's really been interesting and informative to me. Is we ask people to send us your questions, we'll try to answer them, and inevitably what people are really interested in, I mean, they want to know about the big stuff and all that, and we need to do that. That's the really important stuff as far as our mission is. But they want to know, well, you know, why is it I can't park over here? Why is it that, you know, that this HOV lane is set up this way? They really want to know the stuff that's like right in front of them, and that they deal with every day. And it's the kind of thing that frankly, in the newsroom, we probably wouldn't even write about it. We would just say, that's somebody's minor problem. We're not going to spend any time on that. But that's really what people are concerned about. And so it's been great to be able to take those kinds of questions and as best we can answer them and allow, you know, and have that interaction with the reader and see where the gaps really are on our coverage. That these are some of the issues that people are really interested in. So just kind of a quick list of some of the stuff that we've done in the last several months. Mike did what I thought was really cool. It's a really geeky technology story about how Sound Transit is building light rail over the I-90 bridge, and which is a real trick because the bridge moves. You know, it goes up and down and sideways and whatnot, and they're going to run a rail line over there, and if the train falls off the rail, it's 200 feet to the bottom of the railway. And so they got to make sure that it's going to stay in the rails, right?
Imagine that.
Yeah, imagine that. And it's something I've heard more in transportation than I've heard any other area. People are in here where they say, well, this has never been done before. And it seems that it comes up more often than I might expect, where we say, we're going to do it this way. Well, it's never been done before, so we're going to develop a way to do it. Okay. You know, interesting, really expensive. They spent years trying to figure out how to do these connections, the rails, where the rails come through, where these, you know, those joints that connect the floating bridge with the rigid part of the bridge. Yeah, and so it was just really, it was like I say, it was pretty geeky. It was really kind of down in the weeds, but a lot of readers really liked it. It spread really well, and we kind of explained some of the challenges that they were going through to try to make this thing happen. We've, of course, been following the saga of the 99 Tunnel, which is going to open in a few months. Sound Transit cost overruns on the Linwood line, wrote about Everett nation and traffic congestion. They say now it's, you know, you should plan for a 94-minute commute between Everett and Seattle. Done some about the Bellevue light rail tunnel construction, a lot. Some interesting piece about the soaring costs of Sound Transit parking ride garages, which are now projected to cost $100,000 per parking space in Canton, Auburn. It's a lot of money. A lot of stuff on distracted driving, written about the bike share program in Seattle. I understand that Bellevue is about ready to launch one for that with electric bikes. Is that right?
Yes.
It'll be interesting to see how that goes. If that, I guess it's gonna be a limited number of bikes, unlike where we just said bring them all as many as you want. But so that'll be interesting. Did a lot of work on the failed attempt at Olympia to lower the sound transit car tab taxes. That was kind of a bizarre story, frankly. More recently, probably in the last couple months, we've been focusing a lot of attention, frankly, in Seattle on SDOT with the streetcar project that they're trying to do. This Center City connector, where they want to connect the Salt Lake Union streetcar with the First Hill streetcar. They've run another one down First Avenue. And last year we did a story about how David did a story about how this thing cost $177 million for the streetcar, and these projections of ridership seem to be really, well, they seemed very optimistic. They were thinking that it was going to go up, like fourfold or something like that, which may be true. I don't know. But some people were questioning that. They were also kind of questioning the finances, saying, man, are you really going to get that kind of ridership? Going to get that kind of revenue? Are you going to be able to afford this? So we wrote about that, and then we got a tip that said, well, you know what? There's a spat between Metro, which operates the streetcar system, and SDOT, which builds it, it's theirs, about how much it really will cost to operate it. So, we put in records requests for emails and other documents. He got those, and it turns out, Metro was saying that this thing is going to cost 50% more than SDOT said it's going to cost to operate. And none of that information has been shared with the council or with the feds when they filed for their $75 million grant to fund this thing. And so we wrote about that, and the mayor stopped the project, paused it, said, well, we got to look into this. And they started looking into it, and then they found out that the thing was $23 million over budget. So originally it was going to be $150 million. Then it went to $177 million. Now it's about $200 million. So then they've hired a consultant to come in and look at the whole thing and see what the ridership projections are reasonable, to see what the finances are, and then they'll decide whether to move forward. So that was an interesting story. And then we've been also looking at the Move Seattle levy, which just recently has run into problems. Not necessarily the problems aren't recent, but they've recently been revealed. Turns out they don't have as much money as they thought. They kind of overpromised what they said they were going to do when the levy was put on the ballot back in 2015. It was one of those kind of things where and this is a $930 million levy, which is the biggest one in Seattle history. It's twice the size of the levy that it replaced, the Bridge to the Gap levy. And they said they have a lot of good stuff they want to do: school safety projects, transportation projects, school safety, sidewalks, bus lanes, bike lanes, 7 rapid drive lines, a lot of bridge stuff that's happening with bridge repairs. So there's a lot of stuff in there, and then they ran a list of different projects. They said we're going to do this, 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 and this, with a little disclaimer that said, oh, these are like for illustrative purposes only. These are the kinds of things you want to do. But I think when they ran the campaign, it looked like, oh, they're going to do these things. And so, of course, it was approved, and now they can't wait for it. They don't have enough money. Some of their cost estimates were, they even acknowledge now, were lowball. They're just wildly optimistic again. They say they're not going to get as much federal money as they thought they were going to get. And so, they're having to kind of revisit the whole thing. And it's been, frankly, a little bit frustrating because they were looking into this levy last year because there was this plan that they put in about what projects they were going to do year by year. And you look at like 2016, 2017, 2018, we were looking at the list and saying, well, these things are not happening like in 2017. So we called them and said, hey, what's going on? What's the deal? And they say, oh, we're ramping up. Don't worry about it. It's not a problem. We're going to get all this stuff done. We knew all along it was going to take a while to ramp up. They say, well, if you knew that, then why did you say in this document you were going to do this in 2017? I mean, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. And they said, no, it's fine. We're moving on. Well, now we're sort of like ramping down a little bit and realize that they do have a problem. One of the things I was watching a Seattle City Council Transportation Committee meeting yesterday, which is, you know, the extent of my life, I've watched transportation commissions. And
Hey, we attend them.
I should at least I sit in my office and watch it on television. And it was interesting. They're in the, you know, they're, they're, you know, I think they're doing their best. They're trying to figure this out. You know, the new interim head of the department there who wasn't there. He's been in the department off and on a lot of times, but he wasn't there by the time his levy was happening, and so they're trying to sort it out. And it was just interesting to me. And like I said, I don't know anything about. Really don't know the intricacies of transportation. Many people know this better than I do. But he said, well, we hired a consultant to come in and figure out what went wrong and what was promised and what wasn't. It's not. You need to hire somebody to come in and look at your own agency. And they said, well, most of the people are involved in that don't work there anymore. And it just seems like, wow, that's okay. I mean, maybe that's the way it works. That you hire these consultants that come in and this sort of stuff. You know, they might have been busy with other stuff. Maybe they don't have time to do that themselves. So just a little bit about, like, with all these kinds of stories we're writing, the kind of stuff that this is what, you know, makes me, you know, makes me feel good about what we're doing and what our mission is and all that. That when we look at and say we measure everything now, not everything, but we measure page views, we measure, you know, time on page, which is like how much time someone spends in a story. We measure what we call influence subscriptions, which there's several different metrics, but one of them was the story bred within a certain session of 5 stories that ultimately the person subscribed. And so you can kind of get a sense of what is resonating with readers now. It's much better than what we used to. And I guess the long story short is what the stuff that seems to do really well is, well, first off, breaking news does really well, and that's, everybody kind of knows that. When, you know, when that train went off the tracks onto I-5, you know, we got hundreds of thousands of readers pouring into that sort of all over the country. So, you know, that kind of stuff obviously is going to attract a lot of readers. But the stuff that does really well is like the watchdog stories, the real deep, what we call enterprise, which is kind of stepping back and taking a longer look at things. You know, some of the solution stuff. You know, a lot of the mid-range stories, like, oh, this project started here, we're doing this, those things don't really do all that well. People are, you know, I'm sure they're glad to hear about it, but they don't really resonate. But those things really look deeply at an issue. Stuff that, you know, as a journalist, that we think, what we like to do, what we think is important, actually seems to be what the public likes too. So that's great that there's a little bit of alignment there. I want to just touch on some of the challenges that we've had, just so, because I find it interesting. One of the big challenges, you know, like I said, I'm not a reporter anymore. I've been editor for many years, but it just seems, I don't know if it's particularly this area or if this may be a trend that's occurring across government. It probably is, but it's getting harder and harder to get information out of these transportation agencies. They don't call you back. They make you file a public record request. If you ask a fairly simple question, it's like waiting to file a public information request, which can take weeks, sometimes even months, to get information back. You know, we file a lot of records requests for that reason, and then when they say, well, okay, we'll put that in the queue, you know, like Sound Transit, it usually takes a couple months to get something back. You're trying to get information out of them. Sometimes they'll give you stuff, but it was stuff that they've reported on or was on their website. That's great, but if you're asking for other kinds of more detailed stuff that they haven't shared with the public, but it's still public information, it just becomes hard to get. They don't, like when we're doing the Move Seattle stuff, we've been writing about that for a while, and we have another story that will be coming out soon. None of the council members on the transportation committee would call us back or respond by email. They just ignored it. They didn't even say we're not talking to you. They just ignored us, which is, you know, okay. I mean, to they were in the middle of this head tax thing, and so there's a lot of other stuff going on, so maybe it got lost in the shuffle, but it seems to be a little bit of a trend that they, if there's something controversial and they don't want to talk about it, they just don't. And maybe I'd feel the same way if I was in their shoes, and I'd say, why, I would want to have this reporter, he's just going to stir up trouble, but I don't know. The funny thing is even simple stuff like our reader, the column that we do where we answer reader questions. We will put questions into WatchDOT or SDOT or whoever like a week ahead of time, and then they will never get around to answering them. And then I think there's one just recently where he wrote about the it was on the I-90. Some guy was wanted to know what was going on with some potholes in I-90 over there by Factoria. I guess there's some places there where the roadbed, the concrete roadbed is starting to deteriorate, and you can see rebar and whatnot. And he said, what, are they going to fix it? Simple question. So we asked, are you going to fix it? And they said, well, we're aware of it, and we want to get more information. And it went on and on and on. And what was that story? When we asked throughout the week, Michelle asked, then on Friday, she calls again, and the public information officer says, oh, well, it's Friday. Can't really get anybody now, they're all gone. They're not going to cut you. Okay, that's why we asked you on Monday. So that's, for what it's worth, it's a personal pet peeve. Just kind of goes with the territory. Another challenge is balancing what really is a very busy news feed, a lot of stuff going on, a lot of projects happening, balancing that with those kind of deeper stories, the enterprise stories, the solution stories, the watchdog stories. It'd be really easy to spend all your time just sort of running with, the press releases that are coming in and the announcements and whatnot, and not ever kind of breaking away and saying, we just don't have time for that, we need to do this deeper stuff. So that's something we're still trying to get a good balance on. And another challenge that we've been talking about a lot lately is shedding our Seattle blinders, frankly, and looking more regionally about the transportation system. We go out every now and then, we dabble, but we need to look a little more holistically about what's going on the east side, what's going up north, what's going up south, how it all works together, or what are the issues in some Amish are trying to get the work out of there, those kinds of things that we need to find ways of carving out time to write about and explore those things.
Welcome to Bellevue.
Yeah, there you go. I get to Bellevue every now and then. I do get out. I should say I'm a bird watcher for what it's worth. And so every weekend, pretty much, I'm driving all over the place around here. And it does give me a chance to go places I'd never go before, drive on roads I'd never go before, and so I have a pretty good idea of what things look like on the weekend. not during that. Not during the commute time, which I expect is probably very different. A few things that are sort of on the horizon, at least as far as I'm concerned, looking out, forward here in the coming months, the Highway 99 tunnel will be opening this fall, and they'll start tearing down viaduct, so that's going to be a big deal. We'll see what happens, how that changes the system in Seattle. We're still following the Sound Transit build-out. That's, they've spent $54 billion, and that's really incumbent on us to, as best we can, keep track of what they're doing and what kind of decisions they're making and how that's coming together. The buses in the downtown Seattle bus tunnel are going to get kicked out in March, which is like another 500 buses in the city center. They're going to be on the streets, and that's going to create what they are referring to as a period of maximum constraint. Where I don't think you're going to get around very well. You can't get around very well now. My guess is it's going to get worse. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. Of course, you all know, the new toll lanes will start constructing those on 405 south here of Bellevue. We're going to start looking at that issue. One thing I think is kind of interesting, this whole notion of personal transportation, talking about like electric bikes, and actually what some people think is going to be a really big deal with the electric scooters that you can jump on and zoom around and then just pick it up and get on the train or get on the bus and carry it with you. Those, my guess is those are going to become really, really common and will present interesting challenges for the system about how they can allow them on the sidewalk, where are they going to be in a traffic lane, how how are these going to work with the system? And that's, they were in San Francisco. I think it was Lime Bike that dumped a whole bunch of electric scooters on the streets because Lime Bike has them and they want to bring them here. And the city attorney wrote them a letter, had a cease and desist letter because they were being parked illegally. There's being dumped all over the place, blocking curb cuts and other things. And so that's one thing is the scooter share program. But these things, you go on Amazon, you can get one for $500. Some of them are less than that. So I think a lot of people are just going to buy them. And they're going to be zipping around town, and they're great in an urban area. I mean, I think I can see why they would be popular, but they are going to present an initial challenge. And then my personal favorite, for some reason, I'm kind of obsessed with this idea of curb space, and which we haven't really written much about, but the curbs are changing, and obviously they're not for parking anymore. It's out in Seattle, and there's this huge fight over who gets access to the curb now. The delivery trucks and people need access to it. Uber and Lyft needs access to it. Some people want to park there. There's a bike lane there. There's or a bus lane, and so it's becoming a real interesting dynamic, and you can see a real big change in how cities allocate curb space and what that means for livability and how we get around. And I just think it's a really interesting transition that we're sort of going through now. It'll be interesting to watch and see how that happens. And that's about it. I'm hoping that you guys have questions about what vision. Do you want to have Briar talk first and then questions?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Let's let the boss, the editorial board boss, talk his little thing, and then we can come back and ask questions.
Thanks. Technically, Richard's more my boss than I am, so.
Well, I should say, another disclaimer, Briar's in the editorial board, I'm in the news, and we don't work together. I like Briar, he's a great guy, he's a really smart guy. I don't know what he's doing at any given time until I read it in the paper. He doesn't know what we're doing. There is this real separation between news and editorial, and I just want to make that clear. Although, they do traffic lab stuff, but Briar doesn't come to our meetings, he doesn't. What's your surprise as anybody when we publish this story?
My sources. Well, I'm Briar Dudley. I've worked for the Times for about 20 years. I actually started on the other side of the freeway here, and we had a Bellevue bureau, and those were great days. We actually had a whole newsroom over here just to the east side, and I think it was probably about as big as many small newspapers, but that was back in the glory days. I started out covering Redmond.
Louder.
Sorry, I started out covering Redmond for the Seattle Times, which was a great introduction to transportation issues. That was when the Overlake stuff was happening, the Bellevue Redmond Overlake project, because we had Microsoft coming and everything was overwhelmed here. And what I saw then and I see now on the editorial board is that the East Side has such higher literacy around these issues than Seattle. It's shocking. And I moved from being a reporter to being a tech columnist to the editorial board a couple of years ago. The editorial board represents the views of the publisher. I write editorials on the editorial page. I write columns and things like that. We also, as part of the project, part of the editorial board's duty too is we vet candidates and make recommendations about who you should vote for.
We'll see you.
Yes, exactly. We'll see you again soon. And it's a fascinating glimpse into what's going on around the region for us too, because we have people coming from all over, from south, north, east, west, and the candidates who come from the east side are so crisp and sharp and knowledgeable about transportation, about state laws like Growth Management Act and how that affects transportation, that you can have a really good conversation, and then you get the 45 people running for a Seattle City Council position come in, and you ask, who knows what the word concurrency means? And boom, silence. I have no idea what's going on.
Why are we not surprised?
It's kind of shocking. So I really appreciate you all and what you all did, that your engagement on this issue is super helpful, and please keep us honest and let us know when we're off base. I'm here because as part of Traffic Lab, there was a portion of the money went to the editorial page. Most of it is for news reporting for Richard's crew. But there's a little bit too, so that the opinion page can get engaged, because it's important to not just have reporting, but also to, when you're talking about solutions, to argue for certain things and for certain changes. That was most visible last fall when I did a big project where I pulled off my regular duty for a few months and I wrote about a group called Transportation Choices Coalition. We did kind of a big blowout on who they are, who's pulling the strings. Some of it was about their transportation policy proper, but it kind of morphed into a public policy question. Because this group is super secretive, you don't really know who's giving it money, yet it's running all these campaigns that are generating billions of dollars and, you know, basically deciding how we spend what we spend on transportation, run by this little 6-person think tank in Pioneer Square that's also managed to infiltrate the highest levels of transportation policy in the state of Washington. You know, one of their workers is on the Transportation Commission. You know, one of them is now Dow Constantine's chief of staff, and the woman in charge, Jenny Durkin, hired her to be deputy mayor. So it's really hard to fight that.
And a former one is the city council.
Yeah.
That's right. Yes, Rob Johnson. So it's really interesting because we write about transportation. We could write every day about some of these topics. I wish I could spend all year sometimes just writing about this stuff. I like the engineering side of it. Yeah, the engineering side of it is fantastic. You know, all of these policymakers say, "Oh, we're making data-driven decisions, so we're going to remove this traffic lane downtown that carries 15,000 people a day and replace it with a bike lane that carries 1,200 people a day." I'm like, ah, I thought this was data-driven. So there's the kind of, you know, engineering side is fantastic, and Mike Lindblom is terrific at that stuff. But what I focus on mostly is kind of the intersection of that with policy, because bad policy drives bad engineering decisions, and you know, we see that all around. And it's really hard to cut through all the BS in transportation. You know, Richard mentioned these blogs and things, the Seattle subway, stuff like that. As the news industry has contracted, you know, we lost the East Side paper, the daily paper, the PI's pretty much gone. We don't have the resources we used to. The void for information has been filled by advocacy, you know, faux news, fake news, whatever you want to call it, organizations. And you don't really know what's driving them, but usually they have an agenda and they're being paid by people who are going to profit from this somehow. So I take that, all of their stuff. I mean, they're smart people and they're thoughtful about it, but a lot of it is to drive a particular agenda. And that agenda in Seattle, it kind of takes public shape in this utopian vision of what urban areas should be and how people should move around. And it all sounds great when you're a 27-year-old able-bodied single person with no kids. But then in the real world, it kind of falls apart real quick. And then when you get outside of the kind of Capitol Hill epicenter and you get into the real world where people actually live, you realize that utopian vision is kind of BS. And so I feel like it's part of our mission on the editorial page, not to counter it with a different utopian vision, but to just kind of inform the community so we can make good decisions about this stuff. You know, it's kind of like we're in a boat, you know, and there's this anchor that's dragging it, pulling it one direction, and we're trying to pull that up and get the boat going in a straight line so everybody can understand what's really going on. And then on the opinion page, we might want to say, you know, turn a little bit right, turn a little bit left, but it's hard because it's so skewed by the misinformation that's out there right now. It's like a constant battle for us to just say, really, you're just flat wrong. Let's have a conversation about what's right. Let's just get the facts straight. It's really, really a challenge. And I think that's part of the reason. There's a lot of money on the table too, obviously. When you're dealing with $50 billion, $100 billion investments, you know, there's a lot of impetus behind changing the discussion and funneling the investments we're making into a certain area. So that's kind of where I'm coming from on the editorial page. I'm going to be doing more Traffic Lab stuff. I really appreciate the funding that the companies have. I think that some of the supporters we have want to see more factual reporting out there, a little bit less of the spin that we tend to get. And it's regional stuff too. You know, a solid complaint about Seattle Times is we spend way too much time obsessing about Seattle. when, you know, half plus of our readers are outside Seattle, and that's absolutely true. One little small counter argument is that a lot of people who are outside the region still come to Seattle for work, and they come to go to sporting events or whatever. So, and Seattle obviously has sort of, you know, the money flows from Seattle out to the region as far as economic activity. That doesn't really justify it though. We need to do a better job. And as I said before, people on the east side in particular are so sophisticated about transportation. I gotta say, I'm kind of embarrassed sometimes with our coverage that does not kind of come to your level, you know, on that. So like the concurrency question, you know, everybody in this room probably knows what concurrency is, I'm sure. That's right at the heart of all of the problems we're having in Seattle and the greater region, and you know, we're allowing more growth without providing the infrastructure to support it concurrently. And Seattle gets these kind of crazy ideas about how to deal with it, and the influence of money are kind of concentrated there, and then that's seeping out into the region. I mean, you see the planners in Bellevue and Kirkland and Redmond and Mercer Island, and I hope I don't offend you, go to the same conference with the people from Seattle, and there's this kind of groupthink that emanates out from the city. And please, when you see that happening and you think it's wrong, let us know. Give us. I think that's a fertile area for us to explore, is how Seattle's crazy trickles out all around the region and screws everything else up. So that sounds terribly negative, but it's really, I don't know, Seattle is just wacky right now. It's kind of off the rails, and, so to speak. Anyway, I can ramble on about this, but if you guys have, I should tell too, one last little thing about transportation with Traffic Lab is, even though we haven't been doing specifically branded Traffic Lab stories on the editorial page too often, all the reporting that Richard's team's doing and the stuff that I've done kind of influences our editorial board. And our board is a group of writers and editors as a publisher, and you know, we meet all the time, come up with ideas about policy stuff, what should we say, and it's very heavily influenced by the reporting and our pursuit of the facts that the Traffic Lab investment enables.
Thank you. Let's 35 minutes here for questions, and I'll try to monitor. I will say the one thing is that we are the East Side Transportation Association, and therefore we like to put our blinders on. Seattle is Seattle, and we are the rest of the county. Fair enough. So I'll start with Will.
I'd like to ask a 9-part question, but I won't. And since you've already answered from the editorial board's position, the question I was going to ask the lab, and that is whether or not there are more loons inside Seattle or out. I'll just ask this one question, and that is, do you have a mechanism to determine what the really important transportation issues are and to focus on it? And for example, I'd like to throw this out for you to chew on a little. We have a lot of conversations that are being driven by the bicycle interests, and I own 2 bikes, so I'm not hostile to bikes. But I can't find anywhere whether or not increased bicycle uses increases throughput of goods and people, or decreases the throughput of goods and people. And that seems to me the kind of fundamental questions that you need to get answered so you can make good policy decisions. Have you dealt with that at all, or are you going to?
Well, I guess my answer would be, I mean, that's a good question, and again, I'm not an editorial writer, so I know sometimes people are amazed when I say I don't have an opinion, which I don't. I've been doing this long enough now where sort of the opinion's been wrung out of me now, and so I'm one of those guys. Well, on the one hand, on the other. This is why I kind of like doing what I'm doing. But what I can tell you is what I hear from people who like build bike lanes or put in, are spending $54 billion on a light rail system or that sort of thing. They say, I think they're honest, and they say, this is not going to reduce congestion. It's not going to make that person's commute in a car any better. What it will do is, if you don't want to be in that car, it gives you an alternative. Everybody else stuck in the highway is still stuck in the highway, but those other people have an alternative to not be stuck in the highway. Is that right? Is that wrong? I don't know. I mean, that's what I hear. Now, it's an interesting question, and we struggle a little bit about with the whole bike question because we hear a lot from the bike, people who like bikes and people who don't like bikes. And frankly, in the newsroom, we have, as we get more younger people in, I mean, I'm as far from a millennial as you can get, but they like bike stories, and they say, we should write more about the bike program and all that stuff. But then you look at the numbers, you know, it's like 3% of people or commuters are on a bicycle. And I look at that, and you have, well, like 9 or 10% of people walking. Why aren't we writing more about people who walk? And why don't we fix the sidewalks before we do this other stuff? So, I mean, is that a very good answer?
Can I respond real quick to that? The control page, I think, job is to say that the question is being framed in a DS way to favor the bike project, because you know, it's a false choice that, oh, you know, here's a bike lane, so you don't have to drive your car if you have a kid or a dog or a ladder in your truck. So there's a false, they're already setting it up to fail right there. And, you know, the congestion thing is a red herring. Congestion is here. That, you know, and nothing we do is going to eliminate congestion at the peak periods, probably, unless we go Houston style. So that's an example of where the advocates are being very successful in framing the conversation in a way that they get what they want. So I go back to the example of the lanes. That's the actual example of 4th Avenue downtown. The lanes and down 4th Avenue carry like what, 12,000 cars per second. Well, 4th. They're talking about 4th.
You're talking about what?
Oh, yeah.
So you know, you have 10 or 12,000 cars. Each car carries 1.5 people or something like that. That's what 16,000, 18,000 people a day use. The capacity of that lane is about 18,000 people. Maximum capacity on that bike lane that they're projecting is maybe 2,000 individuals a day. So, you know, what's the choice there? The choice is, should we reduce capacity? Should we take out that much carrying capacity through the biggest street in the biggest city in the Northwest?
The challenge with this, an alternative is the end goal, but it really should be about the opportunity cost of investing in this rather than that, or using it for this and that. And that's hopefully the time to pick up on the opportunity costs of the alternatives, because that's absent. My question is this: one of the alternatives that's being promoted, including your business writer, is that we have to have more transit. How much would it cost? What would the tax increase have to be to provide the transit trips that is expected to be provided in Seattle? We know how much we're spending now, ungodly sums of money. We know how few riders are on it, what a small percentage of the modes are. But Seattle is pretty much all in, that all of these new trips are being packing people into Seattle for jobs, packing people in to live there. What would the tax increases have to be? What do our sales taxes have to go up? What do our car taxes have to go up? What do our property taxes have to go up to pay for it?
Now, there's just asking questions about what we can provide. Now, when we're talking about transit, we're talking about light rail.
All of it. Because we know what, for how much we're spending, how many trips we're getting.
Right.
We also have a pretty good idea of how many more trips are coming.
Right.
And if all of those are going to be on rail and some buses, basically, the fares cover about 10% of the total cost, maintenance operation plus capital. The other 90% of that trip has to be subsidized with tax. How much would taxes have to be to actually create subsidy for those trips to be able to handle?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's interesting, as I as the guy as where now that we're kind of a peak bus, at least in Seattle, that there's not room for many more buses. First off, Metro they don't have a place to park them. They can't hire enough drivers. And there's no doubt that the bus system is overcrowded. I mean, if you look at the bus system during commute times, people are chock-a-block full. Buses go by people all the time. They're lined up at a bus stop. They could use more buses. They actually probably need more bus transit. But they don't have a place to put them, and I don't know how many more buses you can actually fit, particularly now they're going to move them out of the bus tunnel in the center city.
So a successful transit system problem at 10% fare box recovery of the total cost, the more successful we are, the broker I get.
Yeah, I mean, I mean that's obviously adding in the capital cost, you know, which I totally understand that. I mean, the Metro one operation is running about 30%.
Yeah, they love to say the 30%, but that's ignoring the capital cost. 10% when you bring in capital. Scott.
Good morning. I want to thank you for your reporting, which has been very objective. And unlike the Seattle Weekly, you've never put the F word in front of Kemper Free. Jim's appreciative of that too.
I thought that was a stretch.
So, well, yeah, that's another brag that I used to start campfires. There's so much soy in it, it doesn't work anymore. But I'm curious to ask a question about the corollary of Todd's question, Bill's question, which is, what is the real benefit cost analysis that's being done to determine if these projects are actually reducing congestion? And as a traffic engineer who's been studying this issue for 20 years and followed a lot of the leading publications on congestion, I think we can do more to actually relieve congestion for the 85% of the people in this region that commute to single occupancy. And that choice is entirely driven by land use. And I think you figured that out as you delved into these issues, is that we cannot change land use overnight. And I don't know about you, but as you mentioned, who's going to carry around 2 baby car seats and 6 soccer uniforms and an old McDonald's cheeseburger on a bicycle? That doesn't happen with our suburban lifestyle. So, but think about like Seneca Street, for example, uphill, going towards I-5, and the left turn from 5th. Every time I go through that area, there are people who are cheating by riding down the center lane. They turn into that bus lane and they go up the hill because they're simply tired of the congestion. They don't want to wait in line for 6 blocks and then maybe get stuck at the light twice and not be able to turn. All for a bus lane where I see maybe 10 buses an hour. So that's serving a max of 600-700 people, right? But how many people could be served at that if we're actually in a car lane? And so I think that the real question to start asking these agencies is, are you tipping the scales in favor of benefit for a different group of people?
Yes, they are.
There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, but why and how? And who has given them the authority to do that? Because process, and you say, well, how does that serve the public good? Well, it doesn't matter because we're serving this other objective over here.
It's labor is the power in Washington politics, local politics in King County and Seattle, and look who gets people elected.
Well, yeah.
And look who benefits when we divert more tax dollars to create more public employment through that system you're talking about. It takes away choice from people, though. You're right, and it's benefiting a very small subset of the population, and the majority of people do and will continue to get around by single occupant vehicles. They will for the foreseeable future. Yet those people are demonized in policy discussions, and people pretend that they don't even exist sometimes. And it really, if they only saw the light, they'd all be on the bus. But that's not a reasonable option for most people for most of the trips we take, right?
All right, David?
First, I'd like to say if you can't beat them, join them. So you're welcome to join my Bike to Work team this month. I can give you the details on that. But then back to the points. And one of the things I would love to hear more about are some of these investigative things that I've found problems with what WashDOT has reported related to the tolls. One, of course, is the diversion traffic. Another is the accidents. And they reported that there is no diversion problem, yet our friends at INRIX, I think, could tell you otherwise. And I can give you more information that even Mark Hollenbeck has reported on why WashDOT can't measure it. They're not measuring the right places due to the apps. Regarding the tolls, though, I have gotten quite a few motorcycle riders to tell me that they are getting billed for riding their motorcycle in the toll lanes. And in some of these, one guy reported he has somewhere around $75 worth of tolls on his motorcycle that they have to go back and fight. I would like to hear more about what is the true error rate that WashDOT is getting in their billing cycle. And I know that when they first implemented it, I quickly found multiple articles that you and other agencies found, which was, it added up to millions of billing errors. So if you could maybe explore more in depth into that, because I think that there's a lot that they are tucking under the carpet.
That's a great suggestion. I'm also curious about that gets to the overhead question there too. I mean, how much are we spending on administration and vendor fees and things like that, the tolls versus what? So if we're spending most of it on administration and stuff, is it just social engineering, as opposed to funding?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, that whole, you're right, the overhead is an interesting question because, like I mentioned, Mayor Durkin has proposed in an informal way to toll the central city of Seattle as a way to reduce congestion. I have no idea what that would cost, but it's got to be millions upon millions of dollars. And Then she says, and we'll take the toll money and we'll invest it in transit. Like, well, first you're gonna invest the toll money in running the system and hiring somebody to do it, and not, and so, but how much is left over is the question. Now, as you know, 405 tolls are apparently making money.
Yeah,
I mean,
but they still got 25% or so.
oh yeah, 25, 30% anyway is taken off by some company in, I don't know, where, Texas, okay. And so, yeah, it's a chunk of change.
Versus 1% in the gas tax. Steve, did you have a question?
I did. In looking at all of what you've looked at, do any solutions kind of emerge from this nest of issues and things that you personally think warrant further looking by policymakers?
I guess I don't think that you can. I think what Breyer says is true. There's going to be congestion. I just don't. You can't do what Seattle did, was throw 50,000 people into the center city over the last 8 years or whatever it was, and not think it's just, at least in Seattle, it's going to be congested. Some of those people don't live in Seattle; they live out there. Yeah. The growth is just to the point where I don't think you can do anything that's going to eliminate congestion. It's going to be there. So then the question is, what are all the alternatives? And we're still looking around. I swear, if you guys know something like, hey, here's a great idea that some city has done, you should look at that. Please let me know. I'd love to know, because we're looking for those kinds of things, and I haven't seen a magic bullet.
Mike.
Well, the magic's right here. Since I inked the last dot on this comp plan now 24 years ago, why don't you guys write about the secret little magic corridor that's been in existence for over 100 years that links every single major city of King, Snow, and Pierce County, that sits there unused with weeds growing up on it.
What is that corridor, Mike?
That would be the Burlington Northern Railroad corridor that parallels 405. We built the Transcontinental Railroad in 2 years with human and animal sweat, with TNT and pickaxes. That corridor sits here. That's 2/3 of the cost of what we plan on spending ST3 is already in public ownership. It's already sitting at a 2% grade. And yes, by the way, it's 100 feet wide. So why don't you guys ever talk about the fact that it's sitting there? We talked about it 25 years ago.
What do you think should go there?
Pardon me?
What should go there?
Electric buses.
Exactly.
On one charge.
We've got it right now.
Recharge.
Exactly. You've got in Finland right now, they have electric autonomous vehicles. We know the autonomous we're just 2 years away. General Motors is bringing in a Type 4 self-driving system in 2 model years. You can put the electric buses as pollution-free as you want to be. Anybody with it connected, quiet. Anybody that connected, and it sits here, and it's going to be a and if we don't do it, it's a $54 billion stinking bike lane. Because right now, the bikes are sitting on the corridor that we own.
That's an interesting question. You're right. You're advocating for more transit.
But transit where we own it. Yeah, where we own it.
But people have to get to that
the right mode with the right propulsion.
It's already connected. The Burlington Northern is connected to the UW station. Okay, right now. We can get Kenmore to Seattle, piece of cake. We can get people from Ballard to Seattle, piece of cake. We've got the whole 405. This thing goes from Roy, Washington to Granite Falls and every place in between. And it's sitting there.
There's a lot of money to be made to be building new roads.
Move on, David.
Yeah, I've got a question. As one of those who drives the Google car for a living, I work for a company with 800 people. We would all be out of business if we followed the criteria. Get out of the damn car. I'm a realtor. All right, I'm dead, gone in. But what I've gotten tired after 25 years of this, and most of us in this room have that kind of time in, is we get a lot of promises with very little due diligence, and we deliver too little. And they go from one program to the next program, and if this one's not going real well, we'll bury it, throw some money at it, quiet it down, and go to a new one. I sat for 5 years on Metro Transit's board. We did nothing. 205, 210. We had everything lined up, and then it just got quiet because it wasn't popular. And because they had this magical idea that what we're in the middle of now with the light rail would eventually crush it, so they just basically backed off. But there's an entire massive subset in this metro area of approximately 4 million people or whatever it is, that everybody's got to jump out of their damn cars. All right? We have 18,000 realtors in the state. Well, there's a chunk for you.
If you get rid of half of them, we'd be better off.
Then there's a fishnet state, and then there's a few Democrats still running around. If you get rid of that, then we'd be better off all the way around.
Solve the housing costs, right?
Oh, yeah, bunk them all together. But what I'd like to do is see articles that say, what about those that are being, for want of a better word, semi-demonized, okay? Everything's the bicycle lane, and everything's the walk, and everything is this. Car, as one of you just said, ain't going away.
I guess to answer his question, there's not really a magic bullet out there, but
No.
but I think the only way to really see progress is if we acknowledge realities like what you're talking about, and that influences the planning, because the planning is sort of in pursuit of this bogus utopia thing, and so you're planning for failure. And if we were planning for success based on what was really happening in the world, we would have road capacity developed concurrent with transit capacity, right, or proportionally even. And then we would have a system that didn't just jam everybody into downtown Seattle and downtown Bellevue. We would be dispersing the growth throughout the region. And we're building a $100 billion light rail system to connect Everett to Tacoma, and there's a lot of places to grow there, and people can spread out.
And we are paying our fair share. Don't forget to add that in there.
Yeah, that's right.
Right, and when it's done, it'll carry 1/2 of 1% of the daily rate. John, did you have a question?
Senator Marquez may.
Okay, John, I think is next.
Yeah, I was curious. I think you got a couple different ways. You know, there's a kind of a paradigm that's at work here, right? It goes back to the 90s or maybe the 80s of growth centers connected by high capacity transit. There's a real question of how well that's doing. I think it's going to might show up that the links aren't always going to work. I mean, a lot of them are too small, and some of them are too big. This light rail idea that's kind of the same thing from one along a spine. I think it all kind of breaks down if you look at it a certain way. I'm just hoping you're going to keep a focus on how well that's working. I mean, are people really moving into this? There's also an interesting nexus with homelessness. I was struck, first of all, if you ride the bus in Seattle, you understand it is a homeless transportation system. But now Constantine the other day at an event I was at was talking about that somehow the light rail going out into the suburbs was a part of the homeless situation. So there's a big picture kind of thing here that I hope you'll continue to dig into.
You raised an interesting question about, and I guess to the gentleman we're talking about the abandoned rail line too, is that you're right, we have this hub and spoke system that's been set up, and they're building that out, and which I guess works if you live out there and you work in Seattle. But like if you have a north-south corridor that goes along east of the lake, there are a lot of people who don't work in Seattle, and there are other employment centers, and I think that I think that is one thing that we probably should look at, particularly with the way the buses operate, is because the buses tend to go out and back, out and back, out and back. They don't go this way so much, or around in these other areas, and that's a problem, it seems like.
Well, a couple ways, you guys have great ideas too. You can contact me or Richard or any of the reporters and say, hey, you guys are missing this, or you ought to look at this. That's great. Please keep those tips going. Another option too, on the editorial page, Saturday is kind of given over to the community, and we take guest opinions all the time. We're looking for them all the time, and we're especially looking for opinions from throughout our region. So please think about that. If you have somebody's thoughts and opinions you'd like to share in a written form, just a little short essay, let us know. And it's also important that there's the editor. But I think some of these ideas are good enough and rich enough, and would really be a good conversation starter if we could get your opinions into our paper.
A little newsflash, it's not that there are some that don't work in Seattle. There are far more that don't work in Seattle.
Right. I know. Yeah, there's maybe more than one.
I like the thought you brought up, Mr. Dudley, is the lack of planning here, and if you don't have a plan, then if there's funding or whatever comes along, well, you're not in a position to capitalize on that. Back in the days when I used to be a senator, though, a DOT always had plans, so when other states didn't do all their use of road monies or what have you, we had plans that we could step in and get that money, and we always got money from other states. Now, an interesting thing is, I think there's a change happening in Washington, D.C. And it may be contrary to what some of the people in the city of Seattle like, but I think there's going to be a lot of funding for transportation coming down the road very shortly, coming from the federal government. And the question is really going to be, do we have plans to capture that funding or not? And the attitude toward that funding is going to be more toward roads than it is transit, I think. And have we developed the plans to capitalize on that? And I think that's very important. The other thing I sense is that the east side has recognized that in order to have a viable business climate in downtown, it takes more than the people living in Bellevue to support it. They have to get people from outside inside to Bellevue. I sense, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but I sense that the city of Seattle has the opposite type of thing, that they don't have to have anybody from outside, and that we want to tax more of the people that are earning the money and spend it on people who are not earning anything to provide for all the homeless and everything like that, and spend money more. And the attitude that instead of spending on things that work, we spend on alternate means that get people off of those things that work and make the things that for people that are traveling in and out work, because every time we take a lane for an HOV or a lane for bike lanes or what have you, we make the situation for the bulk of the traveling public work. But the question is, does downtown Seattle recognize the need that to support a viable business district, you have to have more than the people of Seattle shopping there?
That's a good question.
I, who used to live on Mercer Island when we first came there, always loved to go downtown Seattle and do my Christmas shopping. And if I wanted to go to a good restaurant, I went downtown Seattle and do it. I don't do that anymore. Too difficult. And how many people are around that used to go downtown Seattle and just say it's too tough? And it seems to me like you people that are doing this can do a lot toward the attitude of getting us prepared to capitalize with plans that really work to capture future federal funding coming down.
That's a good perspective. We asked those similar questions of all the candidates that are running for Seattle office and things too today. What are you doing? Because once the current Amazon growth stops, it'll be very apparent how dependent Seattle really is on the east side and the rest of King County. The Trump thing's fascinating. I mean, obviously the pendulum's moving back, and that will probably shift more dollars to roads. We saw City of Seattle blame its failure to properly manage its Move Seattle levy on Donald Trump last week, 2 weeks ago. That was pretty funny. And it's his fault that we're spending all the money on bike lanes and couldn't get to the roads. And that was interesting. But you know, more infrastructure spending is a huge priority. It was under President Obama too. What I'm a little worried about though is that the current administration is going to push a privatization thing. And you know, if you like the 405 tolls, you're going to love what he's talking about. So I'm kind of worried about that we have these incredibly priceless, you know, forever assets, and we should not give them away right now. That's my concern.
Yeah, but if you depend on your political people down there to furnish your attitude down here, and there actually is a change of attitude that's taking place in Washington, D.C., that is spreading out, and it seems to me like the state of Washington, Oregon, and California is all resistance to that change, then you'll have plans doing all the wrong things if you don't recognize that the change perhaps is coming. Now, you know, if you think you're going to impeach the president and we're going to return turn back the other, what I'm suggesting is totally wrong. But if you think the president's gonna be successful in what he is proposing, then having plans for that is exactly right.
That's interesting. You know, one place where I saw that up close was when we were doing some reporting on the Mercer Island HOV thing, that situation. And, you know, that the administration changed, and you kind of thought that maybe the new administration would be a little more sympathetic to Mercer Island's case, that, you know, hey, you promised that we'd use this, you know, it makes perfect sense. But there was this very specific protection of HOV lanes that the federal government insisted on, you know, and we're not gonna make any exceptions. And you thought that might have softened with the change at the top, but I think that change doesn't necessarily trickle all the way down into regional offices that said no to Mercer Island, right? So I don't know how long that.
The depth of the
takes.
swamp,
Yeah, it's a swamp.
Eli's next.
Well, with all due respect, I think it's pretty clear Seattle is hostile. But what I think that we're seeing here, and John was getting at that when he was talking about the homeless training, is that what we're seeing is a culture of hostility, passive hostility, not returning phone calls, putting lanes in that are clearly not being used. But more insidiously, as a bus rider here on the east side, very small things that people don't normally notice that are done in other places in the world to cause this kind of panic. So every sign says, don't do this, that's a felony, you can't do that, don't stand here. Even the ads say, your traffic is so bad, but our buses aren't quite that bad. There's nothing positive. There's no bathrooms, there's no place to charge a phone, there's no place to throw anything out, except if the station is by homeless people or in a place where they want people to congregate. So I suggest that we create some sort of citizens group of people who want to use the bus, but it's just, you gotta pee too often, or you have to throw things away too much, or, you know, you do things that other humans do. And if we can do that, I bet you'd see ridership skyrocket twice the size as people realize, man, it's so much easier to do a few of these things by bus now that I can A, B, and C. Because I know, when my phone runs out and I'm using Trip Planner, that's it. I'm now stuck at whatever bus stop I'm at. The concept that I can't have a $1 USB charger at every single seat is just so beyond me. So it's clear to me that we're being passively hostile. The answer is, how do we change that culture from the outside so that it's not being allowed anymore in our transportation system, which is driving the culture of hostility? Thank you.
Ed, you got a comment or a response?
Yeah, it's the people's fault.
No, we have no voice to say, I would like to pee. I would like to have a USB charger. There's no, but you have a voice.
Well, there's a guest. Write that up and send it on in.
You heard me. I'm just a person. You have my same personal needs, so you can figure out what we need at bus stops. You should take the bus sometimes, and you'll see how it works.
Great. Hi. Thanks for your comments and being here. I came in a little bit late. My name is Michael Appleby. I'm running for a state legislator here in the 41st District. And a couple comments. Number one is, love the traffic lab. The articles are fantastic because they're unbiased. They're just clear reporting. I particularly enjoyed the Vancouver story several weeks ago where you talked about density that needs to be built to support sound transit and to make bus more efficient. I'm going to disagree slightly with the educational aspect, Ryder, of what you said, that people on the east side know more about transit than other areas. They do and they don't. I think an area that you can really highlight as a suggestion going forward is fare recovery, because people don't have an idea about what it really costs to operate this system. And then we have this phony government way of accounting, because I'm not a fan of tolling because of the amount of overhead and the unfairness in it, but the reality is they make money, but they don't capitalize the cost, as you pointed out, with regards to fair recovery on other projects. So that would be an awesome article to put in there regarding government accounting on capital costs versus not. The second thing, and I know we only have a few minutes left, but the second thing is regards to the effectiveness of tolling. The report came out, and I was down with the University of Minnesota when they had the report presented back in December. And it was interesting because it didn't meet the criteria. It made money, but they didn't capitalize the cost, which then would have really made it not meet the criteria. But it also didn't meet the speed requirements. WashDOT is not really open to alternative solutions, even though the letter of the law said that it failed and they should have stopped it. So, but what it did prove is that you can move more cars in a through lane. I was always a fan of the fast lane on 167, where the idea was to sell excess capacity. So the fundamental question, and this is a good one for the article, would be is, what is our real goal? Do we want to move people or do we want to move cars? Because if we want to move both, we need to reinstitute the two-person carpooling into the hot lanes and then uncap the tolling, so if there's any excess capacity, then you can let the single occupancy vehicle back in.
All right, is there a question in this one, Michael?
No, it was more of a point than an
All
idea,
right.
so thank you, and those are questions you can ask, because WashDOT is not open to alternative solutions for moving cars and people. Thank
All right,
you.
Bruce.
The last data I saw for jobs in Seattle and the Puget Sound region, Seattle is only about 9% of the jobs.
Downtown Seattle.
Downtown Seattle. Just as a point. Another thing is, it should have been pointed somewhere in these questions and discussions. There's a state law that these projects by government are to be tested by a cost-benefit ratio or analysis. And there's people in this room that worked for years to try to get the Puget Sound Regional Council and other bodies to pay attention to the state law, and they are, the government, our government is refusing to do so in several things, if not all. And that's something to look into, but my question leads is, I was educated as an engineer, so I'm a data person. Also, I'm sitting, you'll note, to the right of Senator here, and
difficult to do.
So that takes care of my profile. But over the years, I've been battered understanding somewhat of sociological group in our society, and in doing so, thinking about how we're going to get out of this problem. I don't have a quick solution, except you really do have to go mine the data and pay attention to the funding and so on and so forth, what we're trying to achieve. Excuse me. There's a economic tsunami coming, which we really aren't talking about. We're looking at, I'm sorry to put a problem on the table, but this may raise solutions that will help us, and that is the economic tsunami is out in the ocean, so to speak, and I understand tsunamis in the ocean, you don't see them. They're just the pressure running through the ocean until it gets to shallow water and then becomes a severe damaging event. Well, when the public voted for Sound Transit's revenue, the last package, they brought down, as everybody's seen in print, you've written about tens of millions of dollars going on and on, even beyond the 30-year period that the voters gave them authorization to do. And a person that has passed away but was a professional engineer doing an analysis on Sound Transit, and actually two of them, on data that Sound Transit put out in its future construction projects after, this was before the election, I believe, about 3 years ago or so, where Sound Transit listed its projects, listed the costs that they thought the projects would be that were in the ballot measure, and their schedule for construction. And the peak of construction was somewhere around the mid 2025, 24 period, and this has been graphed, which we might have to dig out for you. In that time period, and you really could stretch out the beginning of it, the ramping up and the ramping down from 2020 to 2030 on this phase. It, at the peak, it would have 8 major projects underway, I think all of which over $1 billion or multi-billion dollars. The point is that this tsunami of economic is to build this at that peak is going to take probably, I'm just going to say wild things, people from Oregon in construction, people from Idaho, people from California are going to have to come to Washington to work on this project. And it's going to drive up construction costs tremendously in the region, which means, here's where my sociology goes in there, is if any school district that wants to have a levy and remodel an old high school or grade school or whatever is going to have a real hard time during this period getting it built. And like I say, there's a problem. The solution, well, those that have reinvented their school districts here recently have probably done a very good thing before this, and the others will have to wait until after Sound Transit gets on the back side of their feet. And there's other people that'll want to build.
All right, Bruce, I need my 30 seconds.
All right,
I'm gonna cut you off.
so
I'm gonna
I'm
take
looking for these gentlemen to find somewhere or somebody that has a solution for this.
Right.
Well, I would say, I mean, I know that, real quickly, that Sound Transit already has problems with the Linwood line, which is over budget now, partly because the contractor costs are going way up. And you talk about people coming in and build, that's already happening in Seattle. I mean, there's so many towers that can build. I'm sure that people from out of state that are pouring into Seattle, construction workers, and the cost of concrete and labor is going up. So in some ways, that's already occurring, it's pinching Sound Transit right now. But I don't know how they're going to do that many projects in that short period.
And everybody else, including Washington.
I would conclude with saying thank you, both of you, for coming today. I've heard you learn a lot.
Thank you.
I want to put in my thought. We talked a lot about getting at root causes of this. And I want to emphasize the importance of the Puget Sound Regional Council of Transportation, the Policy Board, all of the federal money that comes into the region goes through that particular board and through their grant system out to the distribution. The state law, as a result of whoops, prior to you probably remember whoops, 25, 30 years ago, which was a disaster. The result of that was a state law that's called least cost planning. And it requires planning agencies to look at the least cost way of doing anything. Transportation is one of those anything. And it's the Puget Sound Regional Council that's responsible for applying that law to this region. And Sound Transit gets to point at PSRC and everybody gets to point at everybody else. But it's PSRC's transportation policy group that is driving the idea that the least cost way of doing this is transit and bikes. And we all know that that's just plain can't stand up to the data. But nobody's identifying at PSRC is the key on the higher planning level that's been directed by the PSRC general membership, which is all the cities around the region. But it's directed by this Seattle Central Core political system that drives all the policies that says that we need to spend these federal monies and these policies doing the 2050 long-range plan, all driven by Seattle-centric land use planning for growth of population and employment in Seattle, which drives transit, which drives everything. I would suggest that you pay some further attention to the PSRC and its system.
That's a good idea, and you got, and people in this room might have ideas about this too. I think one thing that's missing from their calculations is the time cost of travel too.
Right.
You know, they figure out maybe the net cost of building, but they don't think about the time that if you're being forced to take a bus and you have to transfer 2 times as opposed to driving, you know, suddenly that trip costs you $50, and
Sure.
is that being factored into the trip cost?
All right. Well, this has been an interesting discussion, so let's thank our guests.
If you have suggestions, you can email me. I don't have my card, but I can tell you what the email address is. Oh, it's rwagoner, RWAGONER, @seattletimes.com.
All right.
Okay?